I was deeply impacted by doing these short-term mission trips. So every opportunity we had in the youth group to go to Tijuana and to build orphanages, to support orphanage work. So I sought out those opportunities because of what an impact they had on me. And I know our listeners, and I know you have some additional questions about that, and where I sit now, I obviously have reflected quite a bit on those trips and the opportunities to engage. But just to be honest with you, they have had a really positive impact on my life.
Welcome to Reimagining Short-Term Missions, a podcast that takes an honest yet hopeful look at the things that the church does in the name of missions. A podcast that seeks to inspire Christ followers to rethink the status quo of short-term missions and to forge a better way forward. We feature honest conversations with people from all over the world, those who go on mission trips and those who host them. And we don't shy away from tackling the hard and uncomfortable questions. Questions like, why do people go on short-term mission trips? Are the things we do in the name of missions actually reflective of the Great Commission? If we're honest, how many of these trips are really more about the personal transformation of those who are sent? And if we admit that our primary motive for short-term missions has to do with personal transformation, is that motive actually a bad thing? I'm Forrest, professor of global studies at Northwest University in Seattle, and co-editor of the book, Reimagining Short-Term Missions. I'll be talking to Dr. Greg Burch, who is a professor and chair of global studies at Multnomah University. Even though Greg has devoted his career to studying the problems that are part of short-term missions culture, he is honest about the fact that the short-term trips that he went on as a youth were deeply transformative for him. So even now he wrestles with the question, is our own personal transformation a legitimate motivation to go on trips that we're calling missions? Friends, there are better ways to love and serve the world, and it starts with courageous conversations. Welcome to Reimagining Short-Term Missions. Greg, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us about short-term missions. Could you, for our listeners, talk about what it is you do day to day, and maybe also how does your work involve short-term mission at all?
Forrest, it's really good to be on this podcast with you. What do I do day to day, night to night, sometimes 24/7?
I hear you.
Is I teach. I teach in the Global Studies Department here at Multnomah University in Portland, Oregon. And I chair our Global Studies Department. So that means I get to dabble in teaching courses in the undergrad program, and we have 5 concentrations. So you can imagine the opportunities for all of us who are teaching in that program. Also oversee our Global Development and Justice Master's program here at Multnomah, a program that you know well, Forrest, as we've interacted over the years and talked about different master programs that we've been a part of. So I teach, I chair, I'm an administrator as well. And more than anything, honestly, my passion is mentoring students and supporting students, and then seeing students leave our institution and go out and do what God has made them to do.
Do you find that a lot of your students are, in getting the degrees that you teach, are they going into anything related to missions? Do they become full-time missionaries, or are they ending up in more community development kinds of careers?
Very few of them in the traditional sense are becoming missionaries, working with the mission organization, raising support, all of that. Although we do have some students that are pursuing those vocations, I guess I would call it. And they're going out and doing some really amazing stuff. And a lot of them are actually focused on community development work through that venue, through that opportunity, through more traditional missions and raising support and so forth. But the majority of our students are working for social services here in Oregon. We also have a lot of folks that are working for international development organizations, doing international programming. A lot of it from stateside, but supporting ongoing localization efforts around the world.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. I mean, I want to ask you about your opinions about short-term missions, but I think sometimes stories are more powerful ways to get at those issues. I'm wondering, when you look back at your life involved, in different international endeavors, I don't know how much you've been involved in short-term missions yourself. Has there been some experience?
Just to be honest with you, I am who I am because of short-term missions. So when I was 16, I was not in a good spot. But I was not in a good place. I was had committed my life to Christ as a young person, but at that age, age of 16, driving around my home community, I was a wreck, literally. And a youth pastor that someone who I knew through our church, I was still going to church all these, during this time, invited me to do a trip to Europe. So I thought, yeah, that would be amazing. Let's do a trip to Europe, and then a few weeks later, I found myself in this spiritual boot camp with an organization, living in a tent, preparing to go and share my faith with people in Europe as we got on trains and as we did all kinds of short dramas throughout Western Europe primarily. And it radically changed my life. It deeply, deeply impacted me, Forrest. And so from that time on, I kept pursuing. I was like I needed a new fix, so I kept pursuing more and more opportunities to do anything that was a missions trip. That's what I knew it to be called. That's what had impacted my life. It really, truly helped me to pursue Christ, to get some help in some areas as well. And so I was deeply impacted by doing these short-term mission trips. So every opportunity we had in the youth group to go to Tijuana and to build orphanages, to support orphanage work. So I sought out those opportunities because of what an impact they had on me. And I know our listeners and I know you have some additional questions about that, and where I sit now, I obviously have reflected quite a bit on those trips and the opportunities to engage, but uh, just to be honest with you, they have had a really positive impact on my life.
I mean, I can say the same thing. On a short-term trip to Honduras, really, really assured my course forward in terms of mission, serving the poor, community development. So I agree with you. Uh, and the problem is that we know that for many people, especially those who are going on these short-term trips, the experience can be pretty profoundly influencing and shaping. And I think if you talk to, say, youth pastors today, they'll say that they want the mission experience, or at least the global travel experience, to help shape the kids, because they know that there can be this transformative effect. And then there's the problem of, is that missions, right?
Yeah,
If you think about the
yeah,
Great Commission, did Jesus say, go and have a transforming life experience to the ends of the earth? It just gets really complicated. And I think as a culture, that's where we are, in a complicated place. We've developed this culture of short-term missions that achieves a lot of ends, but, are these the ends that we should be pursuing? And what does that mean for thinking about short-term missions differently? Of course, that's the point of the book that Angel and I edited, was reimagining what short-term missions could be or should be. But I'm going to ask you. I mean, you've had the positive experience, but I know also that you understand the problems of short-term missions, and if you are to identify one or two main issues that are problematic, that need to be reimagined, what would those be?
man. So just going back to my experiences, for us, I guess the question that needs to be asked, or maybe even answered, is what kind of transformation was taking place in the lives of those that we went to, right? I don't know. I mean, God is works in some ways that I don't completely understand. My perspectives are very myopic oftentimes, and so I would hope that he was at work in the lives of those that I repeated the four spiritual laws to, right? But I don't know how transformative those experiences were for them. Certainly were for me. And so I think what has happened, and certainly what I went on to do with some of those experiences, is just to kind of regurgitate those experiences that I had, because I wanted the people that I mentored to have those same experiences with less of a focus on those that we were going to. I mean, we quoted, Matthew 28, the Great Commission, all the time as we talked about the missions trip that we were going to do that summer with the junior hires or the high school students that I was working with. But in the end, what I wanted was to regurgitate, or to for them to have that same experience, that transformative experience in their lives that impacted me. And so I think what your book is getting to is a lack of imagination, and you've titled it perfectly, perfect for this conversation. Is we have failed to imagine what kind of impact we can have if we as we go mutually working together with those who are receiving the short-term teams. I think of what the emphasis that Paulo Freire puts on praxis, this idea of action, reflection, action, this cyclical process where we are learning as we go. And I wonder if this is not a kind of a guiding theme for our lack of imagination. Like, are we learning, or are we just regurgitating what we've seen ourselves or learned ourselves? And this stuff is really hard to overcome. After spending almost a decade in Latin America working with primarily at-risk youth and children, and doing some teaching as well, I had the opportunity to take a church group back to Costa Rica where we had lived for a few years. And this is after I had, I mean, this sounds kind of, I don't know, sounds a little crazy, but after I had spent many, many years thinking about these issues, even concerned about short-term missions, I took a group with me back to Costa Rica, um, just wanting them to have a powerful experience. I was focused on their experience, less so on those that we were going to. And a good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, his name's Alfredo Mora. He former director of Viva of Latin America, now is the director of a school down there. He told me as we arrived, and we had had weeks of conversations around these issues, but he told me, he goes, Greg, just remember, this is not a missions trip, because the way I understand mission is very colonial. He goes, this is a cultural exchange opportunity where you learn from us and we learn from you. And he reminded me, after all these years of thinking about this stuff, after reading When Helping Hurts, he had to remind me that this is not you guys coming to us with your resources, your abundant resources, but this is an opportunity for you to learn from us just as much as it is an opportunity for us to learn from you. And despite even that, I still led our students into some situations where we were paternalistic, where we were delivering, resources that were just not necessary. So why am I saying this? Forrest, I have spent years thinking about this stuff, and I still find myself committing the same sins.
Well, there's no easy answers. You're right, and maybe there ought not to be if we're too quick to rush to, oh yeah, this is the new model that we need to go for. I don't think we've done the work of imagination, and I think to your point, with this chap who mentored you, I think whatever the answer is, it has to be imagined in collaboration with people like him, right? What we'll call this the receiving context, the people we go to ostensibly serve. If we're going to come up with different ways of doing this that are maybe more biblical, more honest, it's got to involve the perspectives of the global church, of course, which is one of the points of the book. And it can't be sort of a one-way decision or solution that's imposed on everyone else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's that idea of co-powerment that is comes out in the book. When I was reading it, that's what kind of jumped out at me. Like, yes, I understand the need to be mutually engaged together. Partnerships are critical, but what does it mean to truly identify the protagonists that where we're going, who are serving their communities, who are leading and partnering truly under their leadership, right? Not just alongside them, but they're the local experts. So how do we partner under their leadership? One of the other problems for us that I have seen, I've been on the receiving side of these short-term missions as well, right? I worked in Caracas, Venezuela for 7 years, lived there, and we would receive teams down there. And one team brought a bunch of crock pots down to one of the homes where children were living in. We were working with street living kids that were coming off the streets, and they were living in foster care situations. So they brought down a bunch of crock pots, assuming that they knew that the mothers in the homes needed to have crock pots in order to cook their food. And what they didn't realize, though, was that we had we had blackouts most of the day when we were down there, and so crock pots were not really of any help at all to any of our parents that were caring for the kids. And oftentimes we do that in short-term missions. We assume that we know the answers before we even get there, right? And so again, re-emphasizing co-powerment that you talk about in the book, working in mutuality with the folks on the ground is absolutely essential. And then having good data, not basing our responses to the needs on the ground on our assumptions, what I call the crockpot myth, or trap, but rather working in, um, thinking along these issues with our friends who are on the ground.
So, in terms of the book itself, you've had a chance to read it. I'm wondering if there's maybe an idea or concept that stood out to you, or even one of the stories that were told in the different chapters by different authors.
Personally, I loved the chapter by Corbett and Megan Pratt. A lot of good stuff throughout the book, but that asset-based kind of response in short-term missions caught my eye because I've been thinking about these issues for quite some time, and it has kind of um, reformed how I think about short-term missions in many ways. Going in, recognizing God's already present, recognizing that the local community already has significant resources, and not bringing anything that's going to duplicate those resources in any way. That chapter alone, and it probably because of the former reading that I've done on When Helping Hurts and so forth, deeply impacted me and reminded me that once again, in order to break this crockpot trap that I was talking about, um, we need to be in conversation about the local capacity and not try to build capacity that's already present, honestly. So that's the chapter that I'm kind of holding on to. And we do a lot of just, a lot of classes on poverty alleviation. So we're constantly thinking about that. But how do we do that in our short-term missions, if we want to still call it that?
Yeah. So, what's the answer? How do you do it? Solve this problem for us, Greg.
Well, you know what? My answer has been this, Forrest. My answer has been taking students to learn from local communities. I have, me personally, uh, folks, not everybody's going to be able to do this, but me personally, with the capacity that I have, and in the ministry that I'm involved with, I take students around the world and we learn from local actors. That's all we do. I tell our students, don't offer advice because you don't know the context. Be very careful what suggestions you're giving. That's not our place. We're here to learn. Honestly, we're here to learn. If someone says, "Hey, learning with us means doing this service project," then we'll do it. But that's my answer for us. That's not an answer that's going to be suitable for everybody, but that's the world I live in, taking multiple teams a year and learning.
Well, I want to affirm it as a part of the answer, honestly, because what you're doing is you are fostering a sensibility in people. You're helping people to learn cultural humility. I would dare say that you're also teaching people how to listen. And for Americans in particular, that's not a skill we tend to have when we go abroad. And I do think that is a big part of the answer, not just coming up with new methodologies, new models, but new people who think differently and will in their lives embody those ideas of humility, of listening, of collaborative creativity. So I like that as a good part of the answer. So I appreciate you saying that.
And I think you're right. That's just part of the answer. Everybody's going to have to read this book and reimagine what short-term mission looks like in your context, right? But that's my context.
Yeah. Well, I have a daughter who's also about to turn 20, and she did they called it the alternate short-term mission trip in her high school. Most of the kids were off to, the beaches of Cuba, Jamaica, and it was definitely vacation time, right? In the name of short-term missions. But she had a couple of profs who led the Social Justice Club, and so they did this alternate trip where they went down and lived in shelters at the U.S.-Mexican border. And their goal was to listen, to hear as many stories as they could get people to tell them, to understand what their presence meant there and what it didn't mean. So it was a real eye-opening trip for her. But the experience was really crucial. I'm thinking, well, did you have to go to Mexico to experience that? And I don't know. For her, it was important. for her, it was transformative.
Maybe those folks who she met with needed an opportunity to express with their voice what they were experiencing in life. And so, I mean, who's to say that that's not an opportunity to support folks in different contexts, right? Is giving them voice.
Well, I'm wondering, with this book, are there any things that you're going to be doing with it? Are you recommending it to people? Are you sharing it around?
I don't teach a whole lot of, I don't, in fact, I don't teach any classes on short-term missions, but I do have a class that I teach every other year. It's mission strategies and practice. And in that class, we ponder short-term missions. And so I think it's a good opportunity for students to do what Paulo Freire talks about, praxis, because they're going, right? They're doing stuff, whether that be locally here in Portland or internationally. And so it's an opportunity for our students to think about what they're doing. Many of them have already gone. In fact, I can think of a few students that have done short-term missions, and they've been in that class. And so now we have an opportunity to include your text and to do the reflection part of that praxis because they will be going again. So it's a great opportunity for anyone who has been, I think, involved in short-term missions to actually think about this. And what I really love about the book, and this is not just pandering to the commentator here, is that you have an international authors, collaborators, people that are collaborating together, and that's oftentimes not seen in textbooks on short-term missions. So just the fact that you have those in receiving context as well as those in sending context in conversation together, man, that's what sold it for me when I read through the book.
Yeah, that felt very important to us because we understood that again, there's no answer that's going to be, make any sense unless we hear from the folks who are dealing with short-term teams on the other side of the equation. So, yeah, it's been really good actually for Angel and I to learn from those perspectives. Any parting words? Like, what would you say to folks out there? You don't have to say read the book, but I'm just saying in terms of where we need to go from here in the conversation about short-term mission, what do you think is next?
I think we need to, I was going to say reimagine, but that sounds too trite. Let's continue to think. Let's continue to reflect. Let's not do things how they've always been done. For those of us that have been deeply impacted by short-term mission can still impact, but with new configurations. So let's truly okay, here we go. Let's reimagine how it can be done. Man, we've kind of gone through 2 years of silence when it comes to short-term missions in light of the pandemic. The book could not have come out at a better time. People have had the time to reflect a little bit. Let's redo it. Let's do it in new ways, new creative ways that are just as impactful for those that are going as well as those who are on the receiving end.
You've been listening to the Reimagining Short-Term Missions podcast. If you want to explore more diverse and challenging perspectives like this, check out a new book called Reimagining Short-Term Missions, which includes chapters written by our podcast guests and from many more STM innovators from around the world. Your podcast host is Forrest Inslee, co-editor of that book and a professor of global studies at Northwest University in Seattle. Angel Burns is the book's co-editor, and our podcast producer is Heath Hollinsby. Friends, what we need now is nothing short of a revolution in short-term missions. So please help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with others of like heart and mind. This is the time for reimagining short-term missions.